Thank you so much. I don't usually dress like this, but it's for All That Glitters. And more importantly, this was made by a Ukrainian refugee who came to the United States called Xenia. It's her brand called Vestium, and she loaned it to me for tonight because of the theme. So when I was asked to talk about All That Glitters, what I first thought of was that every Hollywood film, or French film, or whatever, that I've ever seen about war reporters is never right. Because every female correspondent, whether it's Angelina Jolie or Jennifer Connelly, looks pristine and beautiful, and they have these white shirts that are perfectly pressed, and they're never dirty, and they're never sleep deprived, and they always run away with Clive Owen or someone like that. And I have to tell you, like, this is not what war is like at all. I just got back from Ukraine. We had, I am a war reporter, and I will talk about that, but right now, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 22nd, 2022, Peter Pomerantsev, the great British academic and expert on Russian propaganda, and I founded the Reckoning Project. We are a war crimes unit inside Ukraine. We investigate war crimes. 30 Ukrainian, they were journalists. We trained them how to be war crime investigators. And we train them specifically so they take testimonies and we investigate crimes that can be built into cases at The Hague. So any of you lawyers out there, you will know what we do. We work directly with prosecutors, and we are building cases against Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. And we're going after these guys, and we are fucking going to get them. We founded the Reckoning Project for different motives. Peter is Soviet. He was born in Kyiv to a Jewish family, and they left in 1979 when he was a baby. For me, the Reckoning Project was founded out of intense anger and bitterness at having reported so many wars and having seen the bad guys and the bad women consistently get away with it. And the wars would end, and these bastards would fade into the villages, and they would disappear, or they would take on new personas. I'm not kidding. In Bosnia, Radovan Karadzic who was the architect of the destruction of Bosnia, became a New Age healer and faded into villages and was treating people with homeopathy and chiropractic, and until finally he was discovered and he was brought to The Hague. But most of them, I'd say 95% of them, get away with it. And I don't just mean Bosnia, the Congo, where so many women have been brutalized, raped, their lives absolutely destroyed. So few people have been tried for sexual violence. Bosnia, 16,000 women were raped, were held in actual rape camps, which is the most hideous thought in the world, but literally they were schools or auditoriums, and they were held and they were raped up to 16 times a day by different Serbian soldiers so that they would get pregnant. And the point of this is that it would disturb the gene pool forever, that there would no longer be Bosnian babies, they would be mixed. They also did this in Rwanda. And Bill explained that I've lived through and reported 19 wars, but horribly, I've lived through 3 genocides, which is the destruction of a nationality. And we believe very strongly that what Vladimir Putin is doing now in Ukraine is another genocide. But Rwanda, the summer of 1994, I went from Bosnia to Rwanda. The genocide had started in April. 1 million people were killed. 1 million. I just want you to try to imagine that, because it's like incomprehensible. 1 million people were killed largely by machete. And the reason why I say that is, like, it's really labor intensive to kill someone with a machete. It's one thing to do a control shot, which is, you know, Putin's great mastery of killing journalists or human rights activists, but to kill someone with a machete, you've got to look them in the eyes, you've got to, like, be labor, you know, standing on top of them, they're screaming, and you kill them. Rwanda is always used as a great story of post-conflict healing, But for me, as a war crimes investigator, what we look at is the results. Like how many of the people that actually did this horror and destroyed this country and murdered 1 million people, how many of them are actually sitting in jail right now? And the answer is not very many. In fact, 2 of the main guys are like living at large in London right now. So what we're really trying at the Reckoning Project is to investigate while the war is still going on. So we basically go in the field and we take human testimony. We call it human testimony, which is basically what journalists do, right? I mean, journalists go and they interview people. But there's a difference in that most journalists' notebooks, or when journalists are called to The Hague, and I've been called several times, the way we take our notes is not really compatible with what the prosecutors need. So Peter and I realized there was this great niche that we could train journalists to be war crime investigators, and we actually could aid prosecutors, so get the evidence while the war is going on, not wait till it was over. In terms of Bosnia, Slobodan Milosevic, who was the man who reigned over 4 wars, did not go to The Hague until 2000, and that was 5 years after the war ended. So they only began the investigations then. That's too late. Witnesses die, they fade away into various places, they leave the country, or they forget. I've been called by Hague investigators, and I've said to them very honestly, gosh, I don't remember what happened on May 2nd, 1993. I wish I could, but I don't have the notebooks anymore. I've moved so many times, I lost them. So what we do is we're documenting everything right now. And in 1 year, I'm so proud of what my team has done because we have 300 witness statements. And we are working directly with the Prosecutor General in Kyiv, Andriy Kostin, and we have testified at Congress, and we've been part of the OSCE reports. All this is very technical, but it just means that we're getting a lot of recognition for, being very young and very small, but very mighty. So back to the whole concept of war. And by the way, the clock isn't working, so it still says 00. So let me know how much more time I have. But I can stay here all night, but I won't. No, I just total out of line, but I was just in Ukraine at a literary festival, and there was this old Ukrainian writer that they couldn't get off stage. And they came twice to pull her off, like literally, and the first time she was like, I'm only half finished. And they were like, oh my God, what do we do? She's like the Erica Jong of Ukraine, like we can't possibly take her away. And so they let her go for another 10 minutes, and then they came to get her again, and she still refused to go. And they literally had to like pull her off the stage. So don't let me get to that. All right. I want to tell you about how wars start, because has anyone in this room ever been in a war? Or do any of you come from another country where, war has descended on your country, or you've had to flee or anything? I bet like very few. I have a friend who's a journalist here who's been in war zones, but I bet there aren't many of you. And judging, again, from Hollywood movies like Blood Diamonds, which was very good, and Jennifer Connelly did call me and talk to me about what it was like to be a journalist in that situation. It's on 5-6 seconds. Is that right?
I can't pass it forward, so it's just...
Could someone tell me when my 10 minutes is up?
Yes.
Someone just shout to me, okay? All right. All right, thank you. So basically, wars start really quickly. And that's the really weird thing, is that even Ukraine, where Putin, as you know, was like amassing troops for 6 months, and we knew he was really close to the border, they were close to Belarus, they were close to Chernihiv. No one, myself, all the analysts, we didn't think it would happen. And every time I've been in a war zone, and I work a lot with refugees, I'll get to that point later, but I always say to them, like, why didn't you leave? You had plenty of time to go. Why didn't you pack your bag, take your kids, go? And they always say, we never thought it would happen. And it's a bit like, I don't know if any of you remember being here during COVID, you know? I lived around the corner on East 4th Street, and it was like apocalyptic. Everyone took off. And there was like so few of us that were here during the worst of it. And I just kind of felt like nothing could have prepared me for this. Nothing could have prepared me for what is happening right now, a global pandemic. And that's what war does to you. You suddenly, everything you know is broken down. Your life is frozen. It's not just that your job stops or that there's bombs everywhere. It's that you've no future and you have no past. And if you're living in a place like Ukraine where Putin is actively trying to erase the past because he's trying to erase Ukrainian identity, then you're almost like consistently in this kind of feeling of frozen animation. It's so weird. So I have a friend I love very much from Sarajevo, and Sarajevo was my first real war. I was very young. I had worked before in the West Bank and Gaza, which was a very different kind of war, which is still ongoing. But I went to Sarajevo, and nothing could have prepared me, nothing could have prepared me for a European city in the 20th century that was under siege. And it literally, like we were sealed off. Sarajevo, you might remember, someone talked about the Olympics in China, but the 1984 Olympics took place in Sarajevo. So it was an Olympic city. So we were in a kind of basin, and the Serbs were on the hills, on the mountains, with all of the heavy weaponry. So they had tanks surrounding us and snipers. So the minute you walked out your door, like some fucker on the mountaintop shot at you. And, you know, they were really good snipers because they had been in the Olympics as riflemen. They were really, really good marksmen. So everyone walked around Sarajevo with, like, amputated legs because they would aim at the knees of women and children. That was their great pleasure, these sadistic, evil people. And anyway, I learned so much from that war, like living for nearly 4 years. The siege went on, the longest running siege in modern history. But the city never fell. It never fell. And the Bosnians had this dark, incredible sense of humor throughout it. They were like, they've taken away our water, they've taken away our food, we're living on humanitarian aid packages that's meant for Asia, mainly rice. You know, the UN, once again, in their great wisdom, sent Bosnian Balkan people who live on meat packages with rice and essentially an Asian diet. So, you know, they were living on this, and they never gave up, and they never fell, and they never, ever capitulated. And I learned so much from that war. And from there, I went to Rwanda, and Rwanda just filled me with a kind of horror and a sense of what evil is. And to this day, like my life's work, which is more than 35 years in war zones, is about trying to find the nature of evil. What happens to people in these times of war? Do you do the right thing? Do you walk away? Do you do nothing at all? Or do you do what's right? And it's really interesting. We all would like to think that we do the right thing. I was married to a French guy who came from a part of France, the Vercors, which was heavily fought over in World War II, and it was heavily laden with the resistance. So, you know, everyone in France says their family was in the resistance, but in this case, you know, this part of the country really, like the resistance, were fighting in the caves, and the Nazis wanted to wipe them out. For some reason, they just hated them, and they wanted to destroy them, and they ended up like wiping out almost all of the resistance. But I used to have these endless fights with my relatives about why people became collaborators during wartime. And they would always say to me, you know, you have no idea what it's like to live during a war and try to get milk for your kid. Or, you know, would you sleep with a German soldier if your children were starving and you had to get food? And I would say, of course I wouldn't, but how do you know? You know, how do you know how you'd react during war? Because nothing during war is logical or real. It's like living constantly in some freaky, like high drug-filled intensity world. So I had another point I wanted to make, which was about refugees. At some point during the war in Syria, which I I could go through my whole catalog of wars, but it would bore the hell out of you. But basically, I went from, how many minutes? Oh, God. All right. Well, I have 2 points I want to make. So I started talking about gold, right? And I want to finish talking about gold. I put this ring on tonight, and I bought it in Egypt in 2016 at the height of the Syrian refugee crisis. I'd been working in Syria since the beginning of the war, mainly working on a book about torture. I have jolly subjects, but anyway, I spent many years working on a book called The Morning They Came for Us, about people who were taken away and tortured. And at one point, I just felt like I wasn't having enough impact with journalism. So I went to work for the UN, you know, naively thinking the UN does something. But actually, occasionally they do. There's really good people working at the UN, but, you know, it's just littered with bureaucracy. Anyway, I was doing a very specific project working with refugee women, Syrian refugee women who had crossed the borders alone because their husbands were either dead or were fighting back in Syria. And so they came across the border of Lebanon, of Jordan, of Egypt, and of Turkey, and they had all their kids with them, and they were by themselves. And the question I always asked them was, and the question I ask everyone in any war zone when they leave, what did you take with you? And they said, my gold. So even the poorest woman had something that was gold that they could sell. So when I finished my job, which was like about a year long, I was in the market in Egypt, and I went and I bought the biggest gold ring I could afford. And, you know, whenever I'm somewhere, I have it with me. And it reminds me, not just because I could sell it, but of who they are and who I am and who I could become so easily. Because every single one of you here today is only safe and has a roof over your head and a meal because it's an accident of birth, that you weren't born in the Congo or in Rwanda or in Ukraine, in Dnipro, in Kyiv, and that you don't have bombs falling on your head. And if we all can remember that, I think it's so important, because then war becomes much more humane. It's not far away in Ukraine, it's here, and it's all of us. So I want to end tonight by just having a minute of silence. I'll use 1 minute of my time. I know I'm already over, but a minute of silence for the many dead, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world, all of those people whose names we don't know, who live in villages, who have suffered terrible crimes and will never know justice. So, like, let's just give them 1 minute, and I'm going to time it. You can stand if you want, or you can sit, but I'm going to stand. Thank you.